Sea kelp thrives in rough waters where there's a fresh supply of nutrients, and in Akaroa Harbour it grows very quickly. It's a renewable resource that's largely been ignored, but one man has seen its huge potential. Roger Beattie's been harvesting kelp for many years.
This is bull kelp here. This occurs around the New Zealand coast. It's a prolific grower. We've got a lot of it, and it makes a great salad. Cut it into strips and just cook it very quickly, blanch it. And if this was in Japan, this would be a huge business.
So how did you get into seaweed?
We were down here at the beach, my wife and I, having a barbecue, and I'd speared some fish in the water just out here. And we were cooking the fish, and there was some seaweed that was on the rocks, and we let it dry. It was a nice hot day, and then we rubbed it and crushed it on the fish, and it was just wonderful. So we dried it commercially and then crushed it. Our friends said, look, you should commercialise this, and then a year or so later we did. In Japan, the seaweed industry is worth billions of dollars, and it should be worth similar numbers here, at least in the hundreds of millions. We're still battling the ministry over Undaria. That's the invasive Japanese seaweed, which is a great seaweed, and we should be harvesting it. It's been really difficult to get into this business, into the kelp for human consumption, because we don't have a modern culture of eating kelp and seaweeds in New Zealand. It's almost a dying art amongst Maori. And we need to rekindle that and allow more people to experiment in the kelp business and the seaweed business.
Roger has a permit to harvest 4 different types of kelp. He gathers it from near the Chatham Islands and also closer to home, here in the Akaroa Harbour. Today he's gathering giant kelp, which grows in abundance here. Spring and winter are the best times to harvest as the kelp grows faster when the water's cool. Giant kelp floats on the water's surface like a mat, and today's calm, settled waters are perfect harvest conditions. Roger's been collecting it for 20 years. The kelp's growth rate would amaze any land-based farmer.
Well, it grows up to about 1 metre a day in really good conditions, and it grows from the tip. Little bits grow and then they break off, they separate off, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that tip, that part there, might only be a day's growth. It's amazing how fast this grows. And this is New Zealand's fastest growing plant.
The kelp grows so fast that sustainability is not a problem. A morning's work will be enough to fill all the barrels on the barge. Later, Roger will dry the kelp and sell it as a food condiment high in iodine and other trace elements. It's a resource he believes is underutilised.
We've got a permit for 20 tonne, but we can harvest 20 tonne just over here in what you can see now. So the resource is huge. It's one of our biggest fisheries resources, and we need to open it up, not just for us, but for other people as well.
Harvesting the kelp is only the first step. It now goes to Christchurch for processing. Through years of practice, Roger has developed his own drying method where the kelp is hung on specially made racks. It looks simple enough, but Roger is meticulous about his method.
We dry it outside until it's semi-dried, about probably 30 to 50% moisture. It's really critical that we don't overcook it. And we dry it outside for 2 reasons. One is to get a bit of UV on it as a sterilisation thing. The other one is it cuts down the costs. And what we're trying to replicate is a northwest wind. What nature does normally. And we slow dry it at under 30 degrees so that we don't cook the goodness out of it. So it retains both the colour, the taste and the texture, and all the goodness.
After the kelp's dried, it'll be ready for packaging. First, they crush it and sieve it into different grades and sizes. This new machine has replaced a much slower hand sieving method. It also means they'll be able to process larger amounts for future export orders At the moment, though, it's only sold in New Zealand. Roger's wife, Nikki, is normally a GP, but she's taking time out to oversee the kelp business. Once it's packed, the seaweed takes on a new life as a nutritious, flaky food seasoning. But the kelp is not just for human consumption. It's also used as a garden fertiliser. And as well as that, Roger's recently been using it on the farm as a feed supplement for his cattle.
Yeah, this is giant kelp. This is the stuff that we don't have for human consumption. So it's perfectly okay, but it might not have dried quite as well, or it might be off the floor, but still fine. And since we've been feeding this to the cattle, their coats have improved, and because we're organic, we just need to give them that extra bit that they don't get out of grass, and it does do that.
And how often do you give it to them?
We try and give them kelp most of the time, but they tend to eat it pretty quickly, so probably once a month we give it to them. And we've been feeding this for about 3 years now.
Roger is exploring other uses for the kelp too. He has some chemists researching its potential as a bioactive ingredient for cosmetics. But Roger's immediate interest is how the kelp can help him on the land. He's developed his own unique organic fertiliser pellet containing dried kelp. He's been trialling it to measure its impact on grass growth.
What I've got here is, and the worms grab a hold of this and take it down into their burrows. When we did the soil test a year after we'd put it on, they were amazed at the number of worms in the soil and the castings in the worm castings. And we've had a lot more grass growth, and the stock are a lot healthier.